You grew up watching movies where cowboys settled everything with a fair showdown. Real life was very different. The real Old West had more disease, hunger, and pointless death than any studio ever wanted to show. Historians spent decades digging through forgotten records and found facts Hollywood will never tell you. Get ready to discover 23 myths you probably still believe. Subscribe to our channel and comment where you're watching us from. Number 1. Forget everything Hollywood showed about cowboys. Those spotless Stetson hats and shiny leather boots? Pure fantasy. Real life was very different. Most of those men wore old hats, beaten up by sun and rain, often handed down from some drover who died on the trail. The boots? Patched up with scraps of cloth and old leather because buying a new pair cost months of wages, and their clothes would go weeks without being washed. Here's the detail nobody talks about. Lice were basically part of the uniform. It wasn't embarrassing. It was everyday life. And those little bugs carried typhus, a disease that took men down faster than any revolver bullet. Out on the cattle drives in Texas and Kansas, more cowboys died from fever and infection than in shootouts. Number 2. Forget that classic scene of two gunfighters staring each other down in the middle of the street, waiting for the clock to hit noon. That's Hollywood stuff. Historical records tell a very different story. Most deaths in the Old West happened in a way that wasn't glamorous at all. From behind, in dark alleys, or during bar fights when everyone had already had too much to drink. Researchers who studied death certificates from the time found something interesting. Stabbings in saloon brawls killed more people than face-to-face shootouts. Those famous showdowns we see in movies? They happen so few times you can count them on your fingers. Real life was messier and less heroic than any screenwriter would like to admit. Number 3. You know that classic cowboy image we see in the movies? White, born in America, the lone hero of the West. Yeah, real history tells a different story. After the Civil War, thousands of formerly enslaved people needed work. And guess where they ended up? On the cattle trails. Historians estimate that about 25% of cowboys were black or Mexican. These guys faced the same blazing sun, the same storms, and the same outlaws. The difference was that at the end of the month, their pay was smaller. They slept separately, ate last. Some became local legends, horsebreakers no one could stay on. But when Hollywood started telling these stories, it made a choice. It put only white faces on the screen. A whole generation of heroes basically vanished from books and screens. Number 4. You grew up watching westerns where Indians attacked wagon trains out of nowhere, right? Well, historical records tell a different story. Most conflicts started after treaties were broken and whole families were driven off land they'd lived on for generations. There are official documents showing that authorities handed out smallpox-infected blankets to tribes. This isn't a theory, it's in the archives. And that image of primitive people? The Cherokee had their own writing system, a constitution, and printed newspapers before they were forced onto the Trail of Tears. The Iroquois even influenced the structure of the American government. So why did Hollywood show it differently for decades? Someone had an interest in justifying what happened. Number 5. Forget that picture of glamorous saloons from the movies. In real life, those places were nothing like what Hollywood showed. Most of them ran out of makeshift shacks, where the smell of sweat, chewed tobacco, and mud took over the whole place. The whiskey they served? It was often mixed with toxic stuff to make it go farther. And the dramatic shootouts? Rare. The everyday violence was a lot more basic. Stabbings over gambling debts or fights that started over stupid insults. Records from the time show that sexually transmitted diseases killed way more men than bullets. Frontier doctors reported horrible cases of untreated syphilis that disfigured entire faces. The truth is, making it through a night in those places depended more on sheer sanitary luck than on being quick on the draw. Number 6. Forget that image of the delicate damsel waiting for a cowboy to save her. Real life was very different. In the Old West, a lot of women carried guns and knew how to use them. Some ran entire brothels and took out competitors without blinking. Others lived off small thefts and scams. And here's the darker side. Hollywood never shows. Women's mortality was terrifying. Infections after childbirth killed people in huge numbers, and homemade procedures ended in tragedy. Historians found records of newborns abandoned in mass graves all across the territory. These women weren't fragile or helpless. They were survivors in a brutal world where the law barely existed. The truth is, they had to be just as tough as any gunslinger to make it through that life. Number 7. You grew up believing Old West sheriffs were heroes with shiny badges protecting honest citizens, right? Real history is very different. Documents from the time show that a lot of lawmen had deals with the very gangs they were supposed to fight, taking a cut of the robberies to look the other way. Sheriff elections worked like this. Whoever handed out the most whiskey and money in the saloons won the job. And that justice? In a lot of towns, it meant an angry mob hanging suspects without any trial, including people who were completely innocent. Historians found cases where the same man was an outlaw in one town and the sheriff in the next. The line between hero and villain basically didn't exist in those wild days. Number 8. The California Gold Rush of 1849 drew more than 300,000 people dreaming of a quick fortune. But here's what the history books don't usually tell you. About 90% of the prospectors went home empty-handed, and a lot of them didn't make it home at all. The reality was brutal. The mines were dark holes where men worked up to 16 hours a day in conditions that would make today's hard labor look easy. And the worst part? Miners used mercury to separate the gold, and that poison contaminated whole rivers. Men drank poisoned water without knowing it. The result was devastating. Tremors, memory loss, and erratic behavior that doctors at the time couldn't even explain. Meanwhile, who actually got rich? The merchants selling shovels, boots, and supplies at outrageous prices. Number 9. You know those movies where cowboys ride in a stagecoach, taking in the scenery while chatting calmly? Yeah, forget that. Real life was brutal. Those wagons didn't have real suspension, just leather straps that made you bounce around like popcorn in a frying pan. Passengers were crammed in for days, sometimes more than a week, without being able to stretch their legs properly. The smell inside that wooden box was enough to turn your stomach. People throwing up, sweating, no showers, and the danger? Drivers rode like maniacs to stay on schedule. Stagecoaches flipped on curves, plunged into ravines. A lot of people died like that, with zero glamour. The Butterfield Overland took 25 days from St. Louis to San Francisco. 25 days in that rolling hell. Number 10. Forget that classic scene of two gunfighters staring each other down in the middle of the street, drawing their guns at superhuman speed. Real life was very different. The revolvers back then, including the famous Colts, were finicky pieces of equipment. They rusted easily, jammed at the worst time, and needed constant upkeep that few people really did right. When a shootout actually happened, it was total chaos. Guys would fire from just a few yards away and still miss most of their shots. Hitting the target depended more on luck than skill. And here's the part nobody talks about. A lot of people who got shot and survived ended up dying weeks later. Why? Infections caused by dirty wounds and a lack of proper medical treatment. The bullet didn't always kill you, but the filth did. Number 11. Everyone thinks the Old West was dangerous because of shootouts and outlaws, right? Well, here's the truth nobody talks about. Most pioneers didn't die from a bullet. They died from a cup of water. That's right. Diseases like tuberculosis and diarrhea were the real killers on the frontier. Life expectancy hovered around 35 years, and the reason was simple: contaminated water and spoiled food. While Hollywood showed noon duels, real life was very different. A simple cut could turn into a deadly infection. A sip from the wrong well meant weeks of suffering. Doctors back then could do little more than watch. The invisible enemy killed more people than all the outlaws put together. Number 12. You know that idea that the Old West was a lawless land where everyone just did whatever they could? Yeah, that's nothing but a fairy tale. The truth is, there were laws, and plenty of them. The problem was those laws were written to benefit some people and hurt others. Judges took under-the-table money to rule cases the way the powerful wanted. Sheriffs looked the other way when it suited them. And here's the part movies never tell you. All that lawless land talk was the perfect excuse. It let terrible things happen to native peoples and enslaved people without anyone being held accountable. It wasn't a lack of order. It was an order that only worked for some. Number 13. You grew up watching Westerns thinking Buffalo Bill was a real, genuine American hero, right? The truth will surprise you. William Cody put on an entertainment show, not a historical picture. The Native Americans who performed in the shows were paid peanuts and were put on display like exotic curiosities for European and American crowds. Bloody battles where hundreds died were turned into circus acts with fireworks and applause. Cody took part in only a few real confrontations, but his writers turned those experiences into dozens of made-up adventures. Even the army sometimes challenged his stories, while millions paid for tickets to see the authentic Old West. Whole tribes were starving on forgotten reservations just a few miles from the lit-up stages. Number 14. You grew up seeing Indians in teepees in the movies, right? Well, Hollywood sold a convenient lie. The truth is that when Europeans arrived, they found cities bigger than London. Cahokia, near St. Louis, had 20,000 people in 1100 AD and huge earthen pyramids. The Pueblo built stone apartment buildings with hundreds of rooms. The Cherokee had been growing corn, beans, and squash on organized farms for centuries. Teepees? That was only on the Great Plains, a small fraction of the peoples. So why show everyone as nomads? Simple. If they were wandering savages, then nobody owned the land. That makes it easier to take. Movies didn't create that image by accident. They helped justify what had already been stolen. Number 15. Forget those movie scenes where cowboys sit around the campfire with a full plate of steaming beans and a juicy steak. The truth was very different and not appetizing at all. The real food on the trails was basically hardtack, those rock-hard biscuits that were often moldy or full of maggots. The meat they had was jerky, so dried out that the men had to soak it in water for hours before they could chew it. Fresh fruits and vegetables were rare luxuries on the long journeys west. The effects of that lousy diet showed up in the cowboys' mouths: swollen gums that bled, teeth that loosened and fell out on their own. Scurvy, the same disease that wrecked sailors at sea, hit these men on land. A lot of veteran cowboys could barely smile by 40 because they simply didn't have any teeth left to show. Number 16. You know those painted ladies in Western movies? Beautiful, calling the shots, living however they wanted. That's pure Hollywood fantasy. The truth was brutal. Most of those women ended up in brothels because they were running from poverty, or they were sold when they were still young. Once they were there, they fell into the debt trap. They were charged for the room, food, clothes, and even fines for bad behavior. The more they worked, the more they owed. Without antibiotics, syphilis was a slow death sentence. The disease ate the body from the inside, rotted bones, and disfigured faces. Few made it past 30. When they died, they were buried in unnamed graves, far from the respectable cemeteries. The madams who controlled them? They're the ones who got rich, building fortunes on other people's suffering. Number 17. A lot of people believe that in the Old West, the dead went into the ground fast because of the intense heat. Makes sense, right? But the real story is way more sinister. Embalmers used pure arsenic on bodies, a powerful poison that nobody regulated back then. Gravediggers who worked with it developed mysterious illnesses and died young without understanding why. The arsenic built up in the body slowly. And there's more. Cemeteries were easy targets for body snatchers who sold fresh corpses to medical schools. Anatomists paid well for study material, and nobody asked too many questions about where it came from. Poor families didn't even know their relatives had been dug up just days after the funeral. The business of death in the West had a dark side movies never showed. Number 18. Forget that classic Hollywood scene where the cowboy rides the wild horse and the two become inseparable partners. Real life was very different and crueler. Native Americans developed training methods based on patience and a connection with the animal, building bonds that lasted for years. A lot of cowboys, though, treated their horses like disposable tools. Historical records show it was common to push animals until they completely collapsed, whipping them non-stop during long cattle drives. When a horse dropped from exhaustion, they'd just grab another one. Historians estimate that thousands of horses died this way on the cattle trails between Texas and Kansas. The phrase, "rode hard and put away wet," comes from that era, describing the brutal treatment that drastically shortened the animals' lives. Number 19. Forget that image of camaraderie in Western movies. Mining in California was a nightmare that few people came out of in one piece. Hastily dug tunnels collapsed without warning, burying dozens of men alive all at once. But the invisible danger was even worse. The mercury used to separate the gold slowly attacked the nervous system. Miners developed tremors so violent they couldn't hold a cup of water. Many completely lost their minds, wandering around the camps, drooling and talking to themselves. Co-workers turned into shadows of themselves in a matter of months. The phrase, "mad as a hatter," came from that same time, from the same poison. Adventure? It was more like slow-motion Russian roulette. Number 20. You learned in school that the government made honest deals with native peoples, right? The truth is very different. More than 500 treaties were signed between the United States and indigenous tribes. You know how many were honored? 0. None. Every time something valuable was found on land promised to native people, gold, silver, or good farmland, the government would just tear up the paper and send in the army. That's what happened at Sand Creek, Colorado in 1864. U.S. soldiers attacked a Cheyenne camp that was under a white flag of peace. Women, children, elders, it didn't matter. The tribe's leader, Black Kettle, had just been given safety guarantees. It meant nothing. That pattern repeated for decades across American territory. Number 21. Almost everyone thinks Mexicans only showed up in the Old West as side characters. The truth is very different. Mexican vaqueros were already masters of cattle work centuries before the first settlers ever reached Texas. They created roping techniques, leather saddles, and even the riding style that became an American symbol. White cowboys basically copied it all. But here's the ugly side of the story. Even though they were the real experts, thousands of vaqueros suffered brutal violence in the decades that followed. Records show lynchings and people being driven off land their families had owned for generations. Hollywood and school textbooks did the rest of the dirty work. They systematically erased that origin to create an image of the West that looked exclusively Anglo-Saxon. Number 22. You grew up watching cowboys twirl Winchesters like they were toys, but real life was very different. A Winchester cost the equivalent of 2 months' pay for an average worker, so most people went unarmed or carried old pistols that jammed at the worst moment. Coroner records from the time show something Hollywood never tells you. Most violent deaths in the Old West didn't come from epic shootouts, but from bar fights that ended in stabbings or fatal punches. Drunk men fighting over cards or insults caused more funerals than all the gunslinger duels put together. The iconic rifle existed, sure, but it was kept for hunting or protection against wild animals, not for settling personal disputes the way movies show. Number 23. You grew up hearing that the Old West was an endless era of shootouts and outlaws right up until the turn of the century. The truth is very different. By around 1880, most towns already had sheriffs, judges, and laws working. The railroads connected everything. Banks opened branches, and ranchers fenced off their land with barbed wire. The chaos, we imagine, lasted maybe 2 decades in isolated areas. So, where did this idea of an eternally Wild West come from? From savvy businessmen like Buffalo Bill, who put together traveling shows in the 1880s and 1890s, selling adventure to urban crowds who had never set foot on a prairie. They turned a frontier that was ending into an entertainment product. Hollywood later grabbed that ready-made script and repeated it for decades. The Wild West became more of a brand name than real history.